Here's what the government says it does. When a US government agency discovers a flaw in commercial software, it doesn't automatically tell the vendor. Instead, it triggers a review. Multiple agencies weigh in: the National Security Agency, the Commerce Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and others. They ask a single, consequential question. Is this vulnerability more valuable as an intelligence tool, or more dangerous if it stays unpatched in civilian systems? This process was formalized by Executive Charter in 2017. It's called the Vulnerabilities Equities Process, the VEP. The unclassified charter states that the primary focus is protecting the public's interest in cybersecurity. That language is real. It's in the document. But the VEP is a review process, not a disclosure guarantee. The actual outcomes, how many vulnerabilities get disclosed versus retained, and why, those numbers are classified. No independent audit mechanism exists. We have the Charter's stated intentions. We don't have the results. That gap between stated intent and verifiable outcome is the first problem. It's not the last. We don't have to rely on theory. We have one very clear, very costly data point. Around 2012, the exact date has never been officially confirmed, the NSA reportedly retained knowledge of a critical vulnerability in Microsoft's Server Message Block Protocol, SMB. The file-sharing layer built into nearly every Windows machine on the planet. The exploit built around that vulnerability was called EternalBlue. For approximately 5 years, based on that reported but unconfirmed C-2012 discovery date, EternalBlue stayed inside a coordination process that, by design, couldn't be reviewed from the outside. This predated the formal VEP Charter, which wasn't signed until 2017. But a predecessor interagency coordination process existed and produced the same result. Retention, no disclosure, no patch. Microsoft didn't know. The public didn't know. Hundreds of millions of Windows machines ran the vulnerable SMB protocol every day, unpatched, because the flaw had never been disclosed. Then, in April 2017, a group calling itself the Shadow Brokers leaked a cache of NSA hacking tools. EternalBlue was in it. Microsoft moved quickly. A patch was issued within weeks. But patches require time. IT teams, update cycles, system reboots. In large organizations, that process takes weeks. In hospitals and government agencies running legacy infrastructure, sometimes months. Weeks after the leak, WannaCry hit. Hospitals in the United Kingdom locked out of patient records. Factories in Germany shut down. Government agencies across Asia paralyzed. Across 150 countries, systems running unpatched Windows, systems that had no idea EternalBlue existed, were encrypted and held for ransom. The estimated global damages range widely depending on methodology. Broader cost estimates, including indirect disruption, lost productivity, and recovery costs, reach $4 to $8 billion. Some analyses focused on direct losses place the figure lower, but even at the most conservative end, the scale is catastrophic. This is the cost of a single retained vulnerability. One flaw, one decision, made inside a classified coordination process with no external audit, that stayed secret until it was stolen. The VEP was formalized that same year, 2017, partly in response to exactly this kind of failure. But the formal charter didn't exist when EternalBlue was retained. And even today, the outcomes of the VEP remain classified. The audit gap that allowed EternalBlue to stay hidden for approximately 5 years still has no independent remedy. The government's disclosure problem doesn't exist in isolation. It sits inside a broader system where the rules around vulnerability disclosure are fractured and enforced inconsistently, when they're enforced at all. Take Google Project Zero. Their policy is unambiguous. If a vendor doesn't patch a reported vulnerability within 90 days, Project Zero publishes the details publicly. No extensions by default. That 90-day clock creates real pressure. It's blunt, it's controversial among vendors, and it works. Because the deadline is firm and the consequences are public. Then there's ISO IEC 29147, the International Coordinated Disclosure Standard. It provides a framework and a vocabulary, but it doesn't mandate any specific timeline. A vendor following ISO IEC 29147 can take 30 days, or 180, or longer. The standard doesn't say. It leaves that determination to the parties involved. And then there's the rest of the industry. Vendor practices vary so widely that calling them a system is generous. Some companies respond within weeks, others take months. Some require researchers to sign non-disclosure agreements before acknowledging a report. Some never respond at all. The result is a patchwork. Researchers don't know what to expect when they submit a report. Vendors face different consequences depending on who found the flaw and which framework, if any, applies. And the public finds out about vulnerabilities on whatever schedule the vendor decides, or not at all, until an exploit appears in the wild. So where does that leave the security researchers who find these vulnerabilities in the first place? Bug bounty programs have grown significantly. By 2023, the market was estimated at over $1 billion annually. Platforms like HackerOne and BugCrowd connect researchers with organizations willing to pay for responsibly disclosed flaws. That growth is real. But growth in market size is not the same as growth in researcher compensation. The median payout for a reported vulnerability sits somewhere between $500 and $1,000. The market got bigger. The individual payouts didn't follow. The same zero-day exploit, the same flaw, the same research hours can fetch $100,000 on the gray market. A critical iOS or browser exploit on Zerodium's published price list? Up to $2.5 million. That figure represents the upper end of their published range. Premium, high-tier 0 days with kernel-level access, not a typical gray market transaction. But even mid-tier exploits command prices that dwarf any corporate bounty program. That's not a small gap. That's a difference of 100 to 5,000 times, depending on the vulnerability class. And it's structural. It persists because the economics of the gray market are driven by demand from buyers who can pay far more than any corporate bug bounty program. This is the economic engine of the vulnerability disclosure crisis. $1 billion bug bounty market sounds like a solution, but a single Zerodium sale for a high-value exploit can represent a meaningful fraction of an entire platform's annual payout total. Researchers aren't making irrational choices. They're responding to the incentives in front of them. And those incentives point away from responsible disclosure, consistently, predictably, and by a wide margin. Now add the legal dimension, and the picture gets worse. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was written in 1986 to prosecute unauthorized computer access and computer crime broadly. But its language is expansive enough that researchers who probe systems, even with good intentions, even following coordinated disclosure practices, have faced criminal exposure under the same statute. In 2022, the Supreme Court's ruling in Van Buren v. United States narrowed the CFAA's scope. The court held that accessing a computer system you're otherwise authorized to access, even for a purpose that wasn't intended, doesn't automatically constitute a violation. That narrowing matters. Researchers are less exposed than they were before 2022. Van Buren closed one significant avenue of prosecution that had been used to chill legitimate security research. But narrowed is not the same as protected. No federal statute creates an explicit safe harbor for good faith security research. As of 2024, a researcher who finds a vulnerability, reports it through coordinated disclosure, and follows every established best practice can still face legal risk under the CFAA. Van Buren reduced the exposure. It did not remove it. The Security Research Clarification Act, a bill that would have established clearer protections, was introduced in Congress but never passed. Some agencies have responded to this gap. The Departments of Commerce, Interior, and Health and Human Services have each published formal vulnerability disclosure policies, clear written guidance for how researchers can report flaws in their systems without triggering a legal response from the agency itself. That's meaningful. A researcher who follows those guidelines has a documented basis for arguing good faith. But agency-level guidance governs how the agency responds, not how a prosecutor might. It is not a statutory shield. The gap between a welcoming agency policy and an unchanged federal statute is real, and researchers operating in good faith still carry legal risk that no published policy can fully remove. So here's what the system actually looks like, assembled in one place. A government review process evaluates discovered vulnerabilities, but its outcomes are classified and unaudited. Disclosure timelines vary depending on who's enforcing them, and most vendors face no enforcement at all. Researchers face a structural financial incentive to skip responsible disclosure entirely, and the law doesn't protect them when they try to do the right thing anyway. EternalBlue is the clearest example of what happens when these failures stack. A vulnerability retained for approximately 5 years, estimated from a reported but officially unconfirmed discovery date, inside a process no one could audit from the outside. Stolen in a single breach, weaponized within weeks. Damage estimates vary significantly by methodology. Broader cost figures, including indirect disruption, reach $4 to $8 billion across 150 countries, while analyses focused on direct losses place the figure lower, but catastrophic at any point in that range. And crucially, the vulnerability existed in civilian systems the entire time it was retained. Every one of those estimated 5 years, every unpatched Windows machine running SMB was exposed to a flaw that its manufacturer had never been told about. The VEP was formalized after that. Federal agencies published disclosure policies. The Supreme Court narrowed the CFAA. These are real steps, and they matter. But the retention rate is still classified. The price gap is still structural. The safe harbor still doesn't exist. The system isn't broken because no one cares. It's broken because the competing pressures, national security, market economics, legal caution, don't resolve neatly. Each one makes sense on its own terms. Together, they create a structure where the public bears the risk of vulnerabilities it doesn't know exist, reported by researchers who can't afford to do the right thing, under a law that doesn't fully protect them if they try. This process reminds us that security isn't a feature you ship. It's a negotiation that never ends. And right now, the public isn't always at the table when the terms get set. But the VEP isn't the only place where classification, economics, and law pull in opposite directions with no one auditing the result. I'm here to help you know the risks written into the systems we all depend on. Which of these 3 gaps do you think needs fixing first? The audit gap, the price gap, or the legal gap? Drop your answer in the comments. See you at the next vulnerability.